I've been sober now for over a year. All of the stupid things on my YouTube channel prior to this video were all over a year ago while I was high on drugs, and my drug addictions led me to the point where I reached a point I could not afford drugs and alcohol, so I would go and steal cough syrup, that dextromethorphan, in the same family as ketamine and PCP, but I would also drink hand sanitizer. If I couldn't go to the dollar store to buy hand sanitizer because I lost my ID, I would, because not the isopropyl alcohol, there's hand sanitizer that's 70% ethyl alcohol, that's the type people drink, and I would go into libraries and I would grab a styrofoam cup and I would duck down behind the counter and fill it up with their hand sanitizer and drink that. And I became so insane, it eventually led to me stabbing some guy in the chest. He's like, "Matthew, you're a cannibal. You devour other people's time, other people's energy, and other people's resources." And I was tripping out so bad, I thought, like, literally I was a cannibal, and it just went downhill from there. So while I was in jail, it was a long story, but I felt like there was this very kind soul who was a victim of rape, torture, and murder, and she was someone who was always willing to help someone out. And there was a very sick sociopathic man pretending to be injured so he could get her in the vehicle. And anyway, I felt like she had come into my cell and placed a rose on the floor. 2 days later, May 9th, I realized her mother had the name Rose in her name, and then this book showed up, Eleanor Roosevelt, and I realized, oh, her name's Eleanor Rose, and I just felt really bad for her mother. Her mother never recovered from that type of suffering, and she had multiple suicide attempts. Her life basically stopped, and now she's in heaven with her mother. I had many confirmations that Eleanor Rose is in heaven, reunited to Denise, and so I was very happy about that. And I just began to pray and pray because all I could do is turn to God. In jail, I had the opportunity to turn to God, or basically turn to no one. And so I began to pray all the time. She had me praying these novenas. I would write them out and recite them each day, 9 consecutive days. And it was interesting, I didn't even realize the next day was Mother's Day. It was just a day full of grace. I wish I could explain it to you. I could often just see Denise Naslund in France, or I could see inner visions of the nation of France. And I treat all these visions with skepticism. But so I thought she was French. I could see her with Napoleon and the French angels and saints, and we'd fill up notebooks full of prayers. And this was before the terrorist attacks in France. And so I wanted to see, I think she's French. So I called my dad and I said, "Could you look up the last name Naslund?" And he said, "It's Swedish." And I'm disappointed because I don't know where Sweden is on the map or anything. It must not be very important. And he says, "Well, Matt, don't you know you have Swedish in you?" And I didn't know that I had Swedish in me. And so that was interesting. Through this girl, I find out I have Swedish in me. And another interesting thing I find out is the Swedes invaded France. They conquered northern France, and they converted and became the Normans. Then they crossed the English Channel and they invaded Great Britain, and they fought the Battle of Hastings for the crown. William the Conqueror, also known as William the Bastard, and he won the battle and became the King of England. Well, I just happened to be in Hastings, Minnesota, fighting my battle, the battle for the crown, as an heir to the throne of God, of course. And when the terrorist attacks happened in France, one of the places they happened at was Saint Denis, which Denis is the male version of her name, Denise. And I saw her picking flowers in France and bringing them to my cell, and those flowers were the victims uprooted by terrorism. And once again, I don't think all my visions are from God, but there are some interesting coincidences that I know some of it has to be of divine origin. Like, for instance, I saw one piece of money the entire time that I was in jail in those 11 months. And it was a 1974 penny. She was murdered in the year 1974. And when the staff were doing a cell search to look for contraband, this song just came to me. "Don't let 'em take my penny, little Danny. Don't let 'em take my penny away. It dated back to 1974 when you were reborn in heaven, welcomed a new saint." Anyway, they took the penny, and when I got out, it was just interesting. I had a Swedish roommate. We drive by this Swedish castle called the Swedish Institute every day, going from the house to the treatment center. It used to be a Swedish neighborhood. The football team here is the Vikings, so now I'm interested in football. I was never a football fan, but the Swedes were Vikings, and this just happens to be the football team is the Vikings because of the high Scandinavian population. And so anyway, I went to to the treatment center, and I asked a guy, I said, when was Richard Nixon impeached? He said, I think it was 1974. So I went out and I began to sing the song, and the song ends, restore my penny little Denny, because it's worth a fortune to me. It dated back to 1974, an important time in history. And I walk back in, and there's this kid named Mohammed, and he's playing with pennies, and he has a total of 4 pennies that date back to before there was the shield on the back of the pennies. And what are the odds of this? That out of those 4 pennies, there is a 1974 penny. And it was restored in such an unlikely way, just minutes after I sang the song, to restore the penny. But it comes through a boy named Muhammad, who's a Muslim, and he thought, I shared my spirituality with him, and he thought the spirituality was interesting, so it led to us conversing and establishing a friendship. And he's more humble than the average Christian, and I had an extreme amount of disgust for the lifestyle of the Prophet Muhammad and the early Muslims, and that policy of forcing yourself upon other people. And I saw there's just no other force on earth I saw doing more damage than Islam. So I had a lot of disgust and hatred for Islam and even Muslims. And the single biggest factor in disarming me and removing some of that was through this penny, because I knew that it was divine providence. I knew that meeting was set up by God, and in my heart, that was the message of this meeting, was that she wanted me to let go of that hatred and that resentment, because it's not going to do any good. And so, yeah, what are the odds of all that? And then on different days of each month, I was dedicated to different saints of different nations. And on August 5th, I made that the Feast of Sweden, because on August 5th, after the Bible study, somebody in our unit got stabbed, so we were stuck down there in the unit where there's there's encyclopedias and stuff, and so it was the first day I actually got to sit down and read about Sweden in the encyclopedia, and it felt great. I felt like I was bonding with King Eric IX of Sweden. Patron saint of Sweden's not even a canonized saint, and a lot of these souls I'm devoted to are not canonized, and you almost never hear of a nation that has a patron saint who's not even recognized as a saint or canonized. But more interesting is that when I used to pray to the Swedes, I used to have these visions of inner visions of soldiers in Napoleonic uniforms with yellow jackets and black pants, so I called them yellow jackets. I went back, after reading about Sweden, I went back to the unit, and there's a yellow jacket in there, and it stung me. Never in the other 11 months was there just some random yellow jacket inside the facility. So I got stung that day when I looked up Sweden, so I made it the Feast of Sweden. And then I call my dad, after assigning the 5th of each month to Sweden, I call my dad, and he says, I asked him who's the patron saint of that day, and he said Our Lady of the Snow. And I thought that's amazing, because I had called the Swedes snowmen, because they're up, some of Sweden's on the other side of the Arctic Circle, so it's really cold, full of ice and snow, and so I called them snowman, so Our Lady of the Snow. So now I call Denise Our Lady of the Snow. Sometimes I would see her as a sparrow in the palm of my hands chirping, and it was kind of interesting because I identified her as a sparrow before the penny shows up. And then there's this story in the Daily Bread about 2 sparrows falling to the ground, 2 sparrows sold for a penny, and not one of them falls to the ground and is forgotten by God. And the first 4 letters of the word coincidence are coin. Interesting. God speaks through coincidences. I wish he would speak clearly, but so far it's just coincidence is what it is. And in that same paragraph in the Daily Bread, it was speaking of peregrine falcons, and I identified her as a hawk as well. And after identifying her as a hawk, I don't know how much longer it was, a few weeks or something, I went to hear the preacher talk, and he talked about Genghis Khan, and Genghis Khan had a hawk, and the hawk was, he was trying to fill up this cup of water. The hawk kept knocking the cup of water out of his hand, so he killed the hawk. Turns out there was a venomous serpent in the water. The hawk was trying to save his life. There was venom in the water. And so the pastor said, how many of us have had a hawk that we had trying to tell us something was bad for us, and we pushed the hawk out of our life. We got rid of the hawk. And so that reminded me, she's in my life. She was assigned to me. She doesn't want me to do things that are bad for me: drugs, pornography, hedonism, all that stuff. Overcome my pride, lust, anger, covetousness, envy, laziness, gluttony, unforgiveness, everything she wants. And so I know this isn't anything satanic or anything like that. This isn't some sort of necromancy. I'm not summoning spirits, but rather the same Holy Spirit that's within me is within her. God knows that she can help me out, and I get a lot of grace when I turn to her when I'm struggling with various temptations, with various sins, and uh, so many other graces as well. It really, I wish there was more I could say there. She brought 13 or 12 other American victims of such atrocities. I call them the Capitol Hill Queens. Each of them represent a star, the original 13 stars, Star Spangled Banner. Each of them want to represent one of the original 13 colonies, stars of American freedom. So may God bless you. Bye.